Led by the magistrate himself, cruel laughter filled the room as the gallery mocked the young black woman isolated at the defense table. The establishment saw her as just another clueless mark to railroad for their own profit. They couldn't have been more wrong. In exactly 45 minutes, she wouldn't merely secure a victory, she was going to entirely dismantle their lives. Cook County Circuit Court, Department 47, smelled faintly of floor wax, stale coffee, and decades of dashed hopes. The heavy oak paneling and high ceilings were designed to make the average citizen feel small, and Judge Ronald Sullivan utilized every inch of that architecture to his advantage. Judge Sullivan had sat on the bench for 22 years. He was a man composed entirely of sharp angles and cynical judgments, known in the local bar association as the executioner of evictions. If you were poor, unrepresented, and standing in front of Judge Sullivan, you were already legally dead. You just hadn't been buried yet. Seated at the plaintiff's table was Bradley Covington, a senior partner at Covington, Hayes & Miller. Bradley wore a bespoke navy blue suit that cost more than the average car, and a gold Rolex gleamed subtly at his wrist every time he reached for his Mont Blanc pen. He represented Apex Holdings, a faceless real estate conglomerate that was currently tearing through the city's historically black neighborhoods, foreclosing on properties through aggressive, highly questionable tax liens and zoning penalties. And standing at the defense table was 28-year-old Maya Caldwell. To the casual observer, Maya looked exactly like the kind of victim Sullivan and Covington devoured before lunch. She wore a slightly oversized beige blazer that looked like it had been rescued from a thrift store rack. Her natural hair was pulled back into a simple, tight bun, and she was nervously clutching a battered yellow legal pad. Her hands appeared to be shaking. Sitting in the wooden gallery benches directly behind her was her grandfather, Arturo Caldwell, an 80-year-old retired machinist who gripped a wooden cane with arthritic hands. The house on 4th Street had been his for 40 years. It was paid off, but Apex Holdings had magically materialized a $45,000 mechanics lien, paired with a series of obscure municipal code violations, claiming Arturo had defaulted and the property was subject to immediate seizure. All right, let's get this over with. Case number 2026, CV8890. Apex Holdings v. Caldwell. Judge Sullivan announced, his voice a gravelly drone of sheer boredom. He didn't even look up from his docket. Counsel, state your appearances. Bradley Covington for the plaintiff, Your Honor, Bradley said, his voice slick and resonant. He offered the judge a familiar, collegial nod, the kind of nod shared between two men who occasionally drank scotch at the same country club. Judge Sullivan finally shifted his gaze to the defense table. His eyes narrowed with immediate irritation. And who are you? Where is Arturo Caldwell's attorney? Maya cleared her throat. It sounded dry. I am Maya Caldwell, Your Honor. Arturo Caldwell is my grandfather. I'll be representing him today. A heavy sigh escaped the judge's lips, amplifying through the microphone. He rubbed his temples as if Maya's very existence was giving him a migraine. Miss Caldwell, this is a court of law, not a daytime television show. Are you a licensed attorney in the state of Illinois? I am. I am acting as his representative, Your Honor, Maya stammered, looking down at her legal pad. I filed the proper pro se appearance paperwork last week. Pro se, Sullivan scoffed, leaning back in his high leather chair. Wonderful. Let me explain something to you, young lady. The rules of evidence and civil procedure are not suspended just because you decided to play lawyer today. I will not hold your hand. If you fail to object properly, you waive your rights. If you don't understand emotion, that is your problem. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Maya said softly. Bradley Covington leaned over to his junior associate and whispered something. The associate snickered, covering his mouth with a file folder. Very well, Judge Sullivan said, checking his heavy gold watch. Mr. Covington, you filed a motion for summary judgment to execute the lien and take possession of the property. I've read your brief. It seems incredibly straightforward. Let's hear it. Thank you, Your Honor, Bradley said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. This is an unfortunate, but legally unambiguous matter. Mr. Caldwell entered into an agreement with a contractor for extensive foundation work in 2023. The contractor sold the debt to my client, Apex Holdings. Mr. Caldwell has failed to make a single payment in 3 years. The interest and penalties have triggered a default clause, giving my client the right to foreclose on the property to satisfy the debt. We have the original contract, the transfer of debt, and the default notices. It's an open and shut case of a homeowner trying to avoid his financial responsibilities. Arturo Caldwell leaned forward in the gallery, his voice shaking. "I never hired no contractor. My foundation is fine. They're lying." Judge Sullivan slammed his gavel down like a thunderclap. "Silence in the gallery. One more outburst from you, Mr. Caldwell, and I will have the bailiff remove you. Your granddaughter chose to represent you. Let her speak." He turned a cold, mocking glare toward Maya. "Well, counsel, do you have a response, or are we going to hand the keys over today?" Maya looked at her legal pad. Her finger traced a line of text, her hand visibly trembling. What Judge Sullivan and Bradley Covington didn't know, what they couldn't possibly fathom, was that Maya's trembling wasn't from fear. It was from adrenaline. Underneath the oversized thrift store blazer, Maya Caldwell wasn't a naive, desperate granddaughter. She was a Yale Law School valedictorian who had just finished a prestigious 2-year clerkship for a Supreme Court justice in Washington, D.C. She had passed the bar in 3 different states with the highest percentiles recorded in a decade. She had spent the last 6 months working undercover with federal investigators to dismantle a massive, multi-million-dollar real estate fraud ring. And she had specifically orchestrated this entire pro se charade to get Ronald Sullivan and Bradley Covington in the exact same room. On the official court record, the trap was set. It was time to offer the bait. "Your Honor," Maya said, her voice wavering perfectly, pitching her tone to sound just desperate enough. "My grandfather never signed that contract. We think it's a fake." Bradley Covington rolled his eyes so hard it was visible from the back row. "Your Honor, please. I submit Plaintiff's Exhibit A, the signed contract with Mr. Caldwell's signature, notarized by a licensed state official. I also submit Exhibit B, an affidavit from the property appraiser, David Higgins, confirming the foundation work was completed." "I have the documents right here," Judge Sullivan said, flipping through the file. He barely glanced at the pages before looking down his nose at Maya. "Miss Caldwell, simply saying it's a fake is not a legal defense. Do you have a handwriting expert? Do you have contradictory affidavits? Because unless you have something other than a gut feeling, I am granting this summary judgment right now." Maya flipped a page on her legal pad. I would like to question the appraiser, Mr. Higgins. He's here today, isn't he?" Bradley stood up. "Objection, Your Honor. This is a hearing for summary judgment, not a full trial. Bringing a witness to the stand is entirely unnecessary and a waste of the court's time." "It's highly irregular," Sullivan agreed, glaring at Maya. "But, Your Honor," Maya pleaded, taking a step out from behind the defense table, "the rules of civil procedure, Rule 16 Rule I'm, says that if there is a genuine dispute of material fact, summary judgment can't be granted. I just want to ask him 3 questions about his affidavit. If he answers them, I'll stop arguing." Judge Sullivan looked at Bradley. Bradley offered a smug, dismissive shrug, as if to say, "Let the kid have her moment before we crush her." "Fine," Judge Sullivan sighed, leaning heavily on his elbow. "Mr. Higgins, please take the stand. Let's indulge this absolute circus for 5 minutes." David Higgins, a beefy man with a red face and a cheap suit that struggled to contain his girth, waddled up to the witness stand. The bailiff swore him in. Higgins looked at Bradley Covington, who gave him a subtle, reassuring nod. Maya approached the stand. She held her legal pad awkwardly against her chest. "Mr. Higgins, you swore in this affidavit." That you personally inspected my grandfather's foundation on October 12th, 2023, and saw the new concrete work. Is that true? Yes, ma'am, Higgins said confidently. I did the inspection myself. And you work for a company called Vanguard Assessments? Maya asked, mispronouncing Vanguard slightly. That's correct, Higgins sneered. I see, Maya said, looking thoroughly confused. I have this piece of paper here. It's a record from the city's Building and Permits Department. I'd like to give it to the judge. She handed a single sheet of paper to the bailiff, who passed it to Bradley Covington first. Bradley glanced at it, chuckled softly, and handed it back to the bailiff to give to the judge. Your Honor, Bradley interrupted, what Miss Caldwell has produced is a standard permit denial form from 2023. It shows a permit was denied to a completely different contractor for the Caldwell property. It has absolutely no relevance to the work done by my client's predecessor. Miss Caldwell, what is the point of this? Judge Sullivan asked, openly exasperated. This isn't even the right contractor. Objection, Your Honor. That's not fair, Maya blurted out, her voice cracking. He's trying to trick you. The courtroom went dead silent for a second. Then a low chuckle started at the plaintiff's table. The junior associate covered his mouth again. Bradley Covington smiled openly. And then Judge Sullivan began to laugh. It wasn't a polite chuckle. It was a deep belly laugh of pure, unfiltered arrogance. The judge leaned back in his chair, shaking his head, his laughter echoing off the high ceiling. Not fair? Judge Sullivan gasped, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. Not fair? Miss Caldwell? Do you think we are at recess in a middle school? This is a court of law. Not fair is not an objection recognized in the state of Illinois, or anywhere else on planet Earth. Even the court stenographer, Brenda, stopped typing for a moment, looking at Maya with deep, uncomfortable pity. Arturo Caldwell lowered his head into his hands in the gallery. Maya stood in the center of the room, her cheeks flushed, absorbing the humiliation. She let the silence stretch, letting the judge's laughter die down naturally. She looked down at her battered shoes, playing the part of the broken, defeated amateur to absolute perfection. But behind her downcast eyes, Maya's mind was moving at the speed of light. They had fallen for it, completely and utterly. I apologize, Your Honor, Maya whispered. Are you quite finished playing lawyer, Miss Caldwell? Sullivan asked, adjusting his robes, a cruel smirk plastered on his face. Are you ready to concede? Just one more question for Mr. Higgins, Maya said quietly. If you please. Sullivan waved his hand dismissively. Make it quick. Maya looked up at the witness. Her nervous, fumbling demeanor vanished for a fraction of a second, replaced by a gaze so intensely sharp that Higgins actually flinched. Mr. Higgins, Maya said, her voice suddenly steady and clear. You testified under oath today, and in your sworn affidavit, that you inspected the property on October 12th, 2023, while employed by Vanguard Assessments. Is that your final sworn testimony? Yes, Higgins said, suddenly feeling a cold sweat prickle the back of his neck. Yes, it is. Thank you, Maya said, turning her back to the witness. She walked back to the defense table and picked up a thick, leather-bound folder that had been hidden underneath her oversized thrift store blazer the entire time. Your Honor, Maya said. Her posture had changed. The slump in her shoulders was gone. She stood perfectly straight, radiating an aura of total, terrifying command. I would like to enter Defense Exhibit C into the record. Judge Sullivan frowned, confused by the sudden shift in the room's atmosphere. Exhibit C? You didn't submit an Exhibit C in your pretrial filings. Actually, Your Honor, I did, Maya said, her voice now ringing through the courtroom with the polished, authoritative cadence of a seasoned litigator. I filed it under seal, directly with the district clerk's office yesterday afternoon, as part of an ongoing federal investigation. but I have an unsealed copy for you right here." Bradley Covington stood up slowly, the smirk finally sliding off his face. "Your Honor, what is this? I demand to see this document immediately." Maya didn't even look at Covington. She handed the heavy folder to the bailiff. "What you are holding, Judge Sullivan," Maya announced, her voice echoing off the oak panels, "is a certified corporate registry from the state of Delaware. It proves that Vanguard Assessments, the company Mr. Higgins just swore he worked for in October 2023, was not legally incorporated until January 2024. Therefore, Mr. Higgins has just committed textbook perjury in your courtroom." The silence in the room was no longer pitying. It was suffocating. Judge Sullivan opened the folder. He read the first page. The color rapidly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a wax statue. "Furthermore," Maya continued, taking a step toward the bench, her eyes locked on the judge, like a predator closing in for the kill. "If you look at page 4 of that registry, you will see the primary shareholder of Vanguard Assessments, the shell company used to generate fake appraisals to steal homes from the elderly in this district." Maya turned slowly, her gaze sweeping past a pale Bradley Covington before locking onto the judge. "The primary shareholder of that fraudulent company," Maya stated, each word dropping like an anvil in the quiet courtroom, "is your wife, Eleanor Sullivan." The silence in Department 47 was absolute, possessing a physical weight that seemed to press the oxygen right out of the room. A dropped pin would have sounded like a gunshot. Judge Ronald Sullivan stared at the piece of paper in his trembling hands. The color had drained from his face so completely that his skin resembled wet parchment. His mouth opened and closed silently, resembling a fish pulled onto a dock. He looked from the document to his wife's name printed in bold, undeniable ink, and then slowly up to the young woman standing before him. The bumbling, nervous girl in the oversized thrift store blazer was entirely gone. Maya Caldwell stood tall, her shoulders squared, her chin high, radiating an absolute, chilling command of the room. She was no longer the prey. She was the apex predator, and the courtroom had just become her cage. "Your Honor, I object," Bradley Covington finally stammered, his polished $1,000,000 veneer shattering in an instant. He leaped to his feet, knocking his expensive leather chair backward. This is an ambush. This document is unverified. Miss Caldwell is not an attorney. She cannot simply bypass discovery and ambush this court with fabricated federal documents." "It is verified, Mr. Covington," Maya replied, her voice smooth, calm, and terrifyingly steady. "In fact, if you look at the bottom right corner of the page the judge is currently sweating on, you will see the official seal of the United States Department of Justice. And as for my credentials..." Maya reached up and pulled a small silver pin from the lapel of her blazer, dropping it onto the defense table. It clattered loudly. It was a pin bearing the seal of the United States Attorney's Office. "I apologize for the theatrical attire," Maya continued, unbuttoning the oversized blazer and slipping it off to reveal a sharp, immaculately tailored charcoal suit underneath. "My name is Maya Caldwell. I am a licensed attorney in New York, California, and Illinois. I am also a Special Assistant United States Attorney, cross-designated with the FBI's Public Corruption Task Force. And for the past 6 months, I have been the lead investigator on Operation House of Cards." David Higgins, the appraiser still sitting in the witness box, let out a pathetic squeak. He looked like he was about to vomit directly onto his shoes. He slowly tried to stand up, attempting to edge toward the side door. "Sit down, Mr. Higgins," Maya snapped without even looking at him. Higgins dropped back into the wooden chair as if he had been physically pushed. "This is an outrage," Judge Sullivan bellowed, his voice cracking violently. The panic in his chest was clawing its way up his throat. He slammed his gavel down, but his hand was shaking so badly the mallet skidded sideways across the sounding block. "I will not be ambushed in my own courtroom. This proceeding is adjourned. Case dismissed. Bailiff, clear the room. I am holding you in contempt, young lady." You can't dismiss a case where you possess a direct, undisclosed financial conflict of interest, Ronald, Maya said, dropping the "Your Honor" entirely. The disrespect hit the judge like a physical blow. Canon 3 of the Illinois Code of Judicial Conduct mandates immediate recusal. But you didn't recuse yourself, did you? Because you thought you were dealing with a poor, uneducated black family you could steamroll. You thought you could rubber stamp a fraudulent foreclosure and hand my grandfather's home to a shell company owned by your own wife. "I knew nothing about Vanguard assessments," Sullivan shouted, a vein throbbing dangerously in his forehead. Sweat was pouring down his temples, soaking the collar of his judicial robes. "My wife's investments are managed through a blind trust. This is a witch hunt." Maya smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a chess grandmaster who had just announced mate in 3. "A blind trust managed by whom, Ronald?" Maya asked, stepping closer to the bench. "Because according to the subpoenaed bank records we obtained on Tuesday, Vanguard Assessments was capitalized with a $500,000 wire transfer from an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, an account registered to a holding company called Covington Capital." Maya pivoted on her heel, her piercing gaze locking on to Bradley Covington. Covington was frozen, his mouth slightly open, his hands gripping the edge of the plaintiff's table so hard his knuckles were stark white. "Isn't that right, Bradley?" Maya asked, her voice echoing in the dead-silent courtroom. "Your law firm wasn't just representing Apex Holdings. You are Apex Holdings. You created the shell companies, you bought up fraudulent debts from shady contractors, and you brought them to Judge Sullivan's courtroom." Sullivan granted the summary judgments, seized the properties, and auctioned them off to Apex Holdings for pennies on the dollar. Then, Apex flipped the properties, and the profits were funneled back into Vanguard Assessments, your kickback fund for the judge. "That is defamatory," Covington yelled, his voice shrill. "You have absolutely no proof of any of this. You are a rogue prosecutor, engaging in a theatrical stunt to save your grandfather's house. I demand to see my counsel." "You're a senior partner at a white shoe law firm, Brad," Maya mocked gently. "You are your counsel. And as for proof..." Maya walked back to her table and picked up her battered yellow legal pad. She didn't read from it. She simply held it. "I didn't need to bring these documents into this state court today," Maya explained, her voice ringing with absolute authority. "The federal grand jury already handed down the sealed indictments at 8:00 a.m. this morning. The arrest warrants for racketeer, influenced, and corrupt organizations, RICO violations, wire fraud, mail fraud, and judicial corruption are already signed." She paused, letting the reality of the words sink in. The heavy, suffocating dread in the room was palpable. "I came here today," Maya continued softly, "because I wanted to look you in the eye. I wanted to sit at this table, as a black woman, as the granddaughter of a man you tried to destroy, and let you laugh at me. I needed you to feel invincible. I needed you to put Mr. Higgins on the stand and suborn perjury on the official state record, because that state-level perjury charge, that's the anchor that guarantees neither of you will get bail." Bradley Covington's survival instincts finally kicked in. The polished, arrogant lawyer who had laughed at Maya just 20 minutes earlier completely disintegrated, replaced by a desperate, cornered animal willing to chew off his own leg to escape the trap. "I didn't know about the kickbacks," Covington practically screamed, physically stepping away from the plaintiff's table, trying to put distance between himself and the judge. He pointed a trembling finger directly at Judge Sullivan. "He demanded them. Sullivan wouldn't approve the judgments unless we routed the consulting fees through his wife's firm. He's the judge. He held the power. I was being extorted." "Bradley, you miserable, lying coward," Judge Sullivan roared, half rising from his chair, his face a terrifying shade of purple. "You brought the Apex scheme to me. You orchestrated the Cayman accounts. You told me it was airtight." "Keep talking," Maya encouraged, crossing her arms and leaning against the wooden railing of the gallery. "Please, the stenographer is getting every word of this." Both men froze, suddenly realizing they had just confessed to a massive federal conspiracy on the official court record. They turned to look at Brenda, the court stenographer. Brenda wasn't typing on her shorthand machine anymore. She was sitting back in her chair, holding a small digital audio recorder, a grim smile on her face. "Brenda?" Judge Sullivan whispered, feeling the floor drop out from underneath him. "Special Agent Brenda Collins, FBI White Collar Crime Division," the stenographer said smoothly, slipping the digital recorder into her pocket. "It's been a truly miserable 3 months listening to you ruin people's lives, Ronald. But your dictation today was incredibly helpful." Arturo Caldwell, sitting in the front row of the gallery, let out a long, shuddering breath. He leaned heavily on his cane, tears of sheer relief streaming down his wrinkled cheeks. Maya stepped over to the railing and gently placed her hand over her grandfather's. He squeezed it tight. "You see, gentlemen," Maya said, turning her attention back to the 2 men whose lives were currently disintegrating in real time. "You made a fatal miscalculation. You built a machine designed to exploit the vulnerable. You targeted the elderly, the poor, the people you assumed didn't have the resources to fight back. You assumed Arturo Caldwell was just another statistic. You didn't bother to check that his granddaughter changed her last name to her mother's maiden name when she joined the Justice Department to keep her family's privacy intact." Judge Sullivan collapsed back into his heavy leather chair. He looked small, suddenly. All the architecture, the high ceilings, the oak paneling, none of it protected him anymore. The gavel that had destroyed so many families lay abandoned on the desk. "My career," Sullivan mumbled, his eyes vacant, staring at the seal of the state of Illinois on the wall opposite him. 22 years on the bench. "Your career is over," Maya stated coldly. "Your pension is forfeit. Your assets, including the $2.4 million in the Cayman accounts, were frozen by the Treasury Department 45 minutes ago. Your wife, Eleanor, is currently being detained at your country club in Winnetka, and you, Ronald, are going to spend the rest of your natural life in a federal penitentiary." Bradley Covington made a sudden, desperate move. He lunged toward the heavy wooden double doors at the back of the courtroom. He didn't have a plan. He only had the overwhelming, blinding urge to flee. He threw his weight against the right door. It opened before he could hit it. Standing in the doorway were 3 men and 2 women wearing dark windbreakers, with the letters FBI printed in stark yellow across the front. Leading the group was Supervisory Special Agent Thomas Reynolds, a towering man with a graying mustache and absolutely zero sense of humor. Bradley Covington stumbled backward, tripping over his own custom Italian leather shoes, and fell hard onto the polished courtroom floor. His gold Rolex smashed against the wood, the glass face shattering into a dozen pieces. "Bradley Covington," Agent Reynolds barked, stepping into the courtroom, a pair of heavy steel handcuffs already unclipped from his belt. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, mail fraud, and violations of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. You have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you use it." 2 agents hauled Covington up by his armpits, slapping the cuffs roughly onto his wrists. He didn't struggle. He just sobbed, a pathetic, broken sound that echoed off the walls. Agent Reynolds walked briskly down the center aisle, bypassing the defense table entirely, and marched straight up the steps to the judge's bench. "Judge Ronald Sullivan," Reynolds said, his voice laced with profound disgust. "Stand up." Sullivan didn't move. He seemed physically incapable of standing. Reynolds grabbed the collar of the judge's heavy black robe and hauled him to his feet, spinning him around and slamming him face first onto his own bench. The sound of the judge's cheek hitting the polished wood was incredibly satisfying to everyone watching. Reynolds yanked Sullivan's arms behind his back, clicking the cuffs into place with a sharp, metallic snap. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. And Ronald, you're going to face a judge who actually respects the law. You're looking at 30 years, minimum." As the FBI agents dragged the disgraced judge and the corrupt lawyer down the center aisle, Maya walked over to the witness stand. David Higgins was curled into a ball in the corner of the box, openly weeping. "Agent Collins?" Maya called out to the stenographer. "Yes, counselor?" "Mr. Higgins here committed perjury in a state proceeding. I believe the local district attorney will want a word with him. Would you mind keeping him company until Chicago PD arrives? It would be my pleasure, the undercover agent smiled. Maya picked up her battered yellow legal pad and her thrift store blazer. She walked back to the gallery railing, where her grandfather was slowly pushing himself up on his cane. Did we win, Maya Bug? Arturo asked, using his childhood nickname for her, his voice thick with emotion. Maya smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that completely transformed her face. Yes, Grandpa, we won. The house is safe. They're never going to hurt anyone ever again. She offered him her arm. Together, the Yale valedictorian and the retired machinist walked slowly down the aisle of Department 47. They left behind the shattered remnants of a corrupt empire, walking out of the heavy oak doors and into the bright, unforgiving light of justice. The arrest of Judge Ronald Sullivan and Bradley Covington sent shockwaves through the entire Illinois legal establishment, shattering the illusion of untouchability that shielded Cook County's elite. By noon the following day, the front page of the Chicago Tribune ran a blaring, bold ink headline: "The Gavel Falls. County Judge Indicted in Multi-Million-Dollar Foreclosure Extortion Ring." The fallout was apocalyptic. The FBI didn't just arrest Sullivan and Covington. They brought down a sledgehammer on the entire operation. Agents raided the gleaming downtown offices of Covington, Hayes, and Miller, carrying out dozens of cardboard boxes and hard drives. The firm's remaining partners, desperate to save themselves, immediately turned state's evidence. They surrendered internal emails that proved Covington had deliberately sought out vulnerable elderly homeowners in gentrifying neighborhoods, creating fraudulent paperwork to steal generational wealth. But the most satisfying act of this real-life drama didn't happen in the press. It happened exactly 8 months later, inside the austere, wood-paneled walls of the Dirksen Federal Courthouse. The tables were finally turned. Maya Caldwell sat at the prosecution table, wearing her impeccably tailored charcoal suit, her Special Assistant U.S. Attorney badge gleaming on her lapel. Across the aisle sat Ronald Sullivan and Bradley Covington. The transformation in the two men was staggering. Covington, stripped of his bespoke Navy suits and his Rolex, was drowning in a standard-issue, shapeless orange jumpsuit from the Metropolitan Correctional Center. He had lost 20 pounds, his hair had thinned dramatically, and his hands shook constantly. Sullivan looked worse. The arrogant, untouchable executioner of evictions had aged a decade and 8 months. Without his imposing black robe, he was just a frail, terrified old man facing the absolute ruin of his legacy. His wife, Eleanor, had already taken a plea deal, agreeing to serve 5 years in a minimum security federal camp in exchange for testifying against her husband. She had filed for divorce the day after her arrest. Presiding over the sentencing was Federal District Judge William Harper, a no-nonsense jurist with a reputation for severely punishing public corruption. He looked down at the two disgraced men with profound disgust. "Before I hand down this sentence," Judge Harper's voice boomed through the courtroom. "The court recognizes the lead prosecutor, Miss Caldwell, to speak on behalf of the victims." Maya stood slowly, walking to the center podium. She didn't carry a battered yellow legal pad this time. She carried a thick, leather-bound binder containing the names of over 140 families. "Your Honor," Maya began, her voice steady, commanding, and laced with righteous conviction. For 22 years, Ronald Sullivan demanded that the citizens of this city respect the law, all while he secretly used his gavel as a weapon to butcher them. He and Bradley Covington did not just steal houses. They stole memories. They stole generational security. They looked at hard-working people like my grandfather, Arturo Caldwell, and saw nothing but prey. They believed that because their victims lacked money, they also lacked a voice. Maya turned her head, locking eyes with Sullivan. He couldn't meet her gaze. He stared firmly at his shackled wrists. "But the law is not a tool for the privileged to oppress the vulnerable," Maya continued, her voice rising, filling every corner of the room. "The law is a shield, and today the shield pushes back. Operation House of Cards has successfully repatriated the $2.4 million hidden in the Cayman Islands. We have liquidated the assets of Vanguard Assessments and Covington's partnership shares. As of this morning, all 143 fraudulent evictions have been officially reversed. The titles have been restored to their rightful owners, completely clear of debt, along with a punitive restitution payout of $50,000 per family. A wave of quiet, joyful weeping swept through the gallery, which was packed shoulder to shoulder with the families who had almost lost everything. Arturo Caldwell sat in the front row, his hands resting on his cane, beaming with an indescribable, overwhelming pride as he watched his granddaughter deliver the final blow. "The government asks for the maximum sentence, Your Honor," Maya concluded, "to ensure that these men never see the inside of a courtroom again, except from the defendant's chair." Judge Harper nodded, adjusting his glasses. "Thank you, Miss Caldwell. Your work on this case has been a credit to the Justice Department." The judge turned his iron gaze to the defense table. "Bradley Covington," Judge Harper stated, his tone freezing the air in the room. "You perverted your oath to the bar for sheer, unadulterated greed. I sentence you to 18 years in a federal penitentiary, followed by 10 years of supervised release. You are permanently disbarred." Covington let out a hollow, choking sob, burying his face in his hands. "And Ronald Sullivan," Judge Harper continued, his voice dripping with contempt, "you are a disgrace to the bench. You weaponized the very justice system you were sworn to protect. There is no redemption for what you have done. I sentence you to 25 years in the Federal Correctional Institution at Terre Haute. You will spend the rest of your natural life behind bars." The heavy strike of Judge Harper's gavel echoed through the room. To Ronald Sullivan, it sounded like the slamming of a coffin lid. Karma had not just knocked on their door, it had kicked it down. Federal marshals grabbed the two men by their arms, hauling them up and marching them out the side door, their chains clinking a pathetic, rhythmic beat against the floorboards. They walked out of the light and into the bleak, permanent shadow of federal lockup. A few hours later, the sun was beginning to set over the historic black neighborhoods of Chicago, casting a warm, golden glow over the quiet streets. Maya Caldwell sat on the porch of the house on 4th Street, a glass of sweet iced tea in her hand. The paint on the old wooden siding was slightly chipped, and the porch swing squeaked when the wind blew, but it was perfect. It was home. The screen door opened, and Arturo hobbled out, taking a seat beside her on the swing. He looked out at his front lawn, taking a deep, unburdened breath for the first time in years. "You know," Arturo said softly, his eyes twinkling, "you looked pretty good in that big, baggy coat, Maya bug." Maya laughed, leaning her head against her grandfather's shoulder. "I think I prefer the suit, Grandpa." "Me too," Arturo smiled, patting her hand. "Me too." They sat together in the fading light, watching the neighborhood come alive. Children were playing in the street, neighbors were talking over their fences, and the houses stood firm, rooted deeply in the earth. The predators had been driven out, and the scales of justice had finally, perfectly, balanced. If you loved this incredible story of justice, karma, and a brilliant undercover takedown, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves seeing corrupt bullies get exactly what they deserve. And subscribe to our channel for more real-life, dramatic stories of everyday heroes fighting back and winning. Drop a comment below. What was your favorite moment of Maya's courtroom trap?